Let's talk about police deference, police idolatry, the notion that we have a society where respect for the police has somehow morphed into idolatry of police, reverence of police. First of all, let's get something straight. We should respect lawful authorities. We should respect the agencies of government. We should respect the systems that help us to regulate our society in just and peaceful and effective ways. That's not debatable. We should also abhor, we should also object to, we should also protest and change systems of government that do not respect justice, that do not produce peace, that are vicious and violent and are abusive. We should not have any confusion about that. We can respect lawful authority and at the same time disrespect, disavow, denounce, and condemn lawless behavior in the name of officialdom. And in this regard, the concern that I have as a person of faith, as a lawyer, and as a person who's worked in the judiciary for over 20 years, is that we have somehow confused respect for the police with reverence for the police. It is now not enough for the police, apparently, or to judges or those who are police supporters, that police officers be respected. Now police have to be revered as if they are gods. Police can do no wrong. Police can be viewed as above reproach, above criticism, above correction, and if they do not respect our norms of justice, above changing. Please remember that in the Declaration of Independence, the founders of the United States mentioned that when a government disrespects its people and refuses to listen to its people, it is incumbent upon that people to change that government, to change it, to correct it. And therefore, when we find law enforcement principles and law enforcement policies and law enforcement practices that disrespect our notions of justice, disrespect our notions of freedom, disrespect humanity, it is our obligations as free people, as people who are humane, as people who love justice, to change it, to correct it. And if it will not be corrected, to get rid of it and replace it. This is not unthinkable. Think about construction. If you build a wall, if you build any vertical structure, people in carpentry know of something called a plumb line. A plumb line is an ancient tool of construction that's used to determine whether or not a vertical wall is in line, is plumb. And if a vertical wall, if a vertical structure, if a wall or a column is built and it is out of plumb, if it is not straight, from antiquity, from ancient times, people in construction have realized one thing. You cannot straighten a wall that is out of plumb by continuing to build it. You cannot build an out of plumb wall straight. The only correction for it, the only correction for it, let me say it again, the only correction for a wall that is out of plumb is to demolish it and to build again from the ground up a wall that is in plumb. You don't demolish it and leave and do nothing. You demolish it for the purpose of building something that is straight, that is in plumb. And so when you hear people talking about defunding the police, changing the police, they're talking about simply their conviction that the police structures, the police practices, the police policies, the police ideology that we now see and has been going on for a long time, that is responsible for the continued abuse and homicide of lawful, peaceful, non-violent, unarmed people, demonstrates that our policing practices are out of plumb. They must be demolished and replaced by policing practices that are just, that are humane, that respect our notions of liberty and freedom and justice for all. That's the first thing. That's the general notion, but then we have to do something else. We have to admit that judges and courts are partially responsible, if not largely responsible, for the reason why our police structures are so out of plumb. One of these days, look soon for a case called Tennessee versus Garner, Garner. In that case, the U.S. Supreme Court said the police cannot use lethal force, cannot use deadly force to apprehend someone who is escaping if they have not engaged in violent conduct. You just can't use deadly force to apprehend somebody who's shoplifting. You can't use deadly force to apprehend somebody who's jaywalking. You can't use deadly force to apprehend a pickpocket. You can't use deadly force to apprehend somebody who basically stole a magazine or allegedly tried to pass a counterfeit bill. But at the very end of that Tennessee versus Garner decision, the majority opinion mentioned that the police have the right to use deadly force if necessary to protect their own lives or the lives of others. That seems straightforward. But that exception to the rule, you can't use deadly force to apprehend a nonviolent offender, has become the rule. So now, whenever there is a case involving the use of abusive or deadly force by a law enforcement officer, you will hear law enforcement officers say, "I feared for my safety," or "I patted him down for officer safety," even when there was no objective signs that the person posed a threat to the police officer or to other people. This is important for us to understand. This is important for us to understand because that is the reason why so many officers say when they have been challenged about the use of lethal force or excessive force, "I used this force because I was in fear for my life." Think about that. What other part of the population is excused, is permitted to kill people because they were afraid without some objective proof that they had a rational basis to be fearful? And the basis has to be not based on what's in the killer's head, but is what is in the general person. What would a reasonable person, what would rational people do? Would they view the situation that was in place to pose a threat? Not would the person individually who used the lethal force do it. That's subjective. But objectively, is there an irrational basis for believing that there is a lethal threat? We have turned the law on its head only in the area of police and force, do we allow the person who uses force to be the determiner as to whether or not the force he or she uses was reasonable? In every other area of the law, we say that in determining whether or not the use of force was reasonable, we approach the question by asking, under all the factors, does this reasonably present a situation where lethal force is warranted, is justified? And if, in the eyes of reasonable people, lethal force is not justified, the fact that the killer thought that he or she was justified using force does not overshadow the reason of the rest of society. Police basically have become a jury unto themselves. They can basically judge their own use of force. If we want to change excessive and abusive law enforcement, we're going to have to change that fact. We have to stop idolizing the police. We have to stop venerating the police. We have to stop basically treating the police as demigods. They deserve our respect. They do not deserve our worship. And because they do not deserve our worship, we should not hesitate to criticize, correct, and condemn them when they violate freedom, justice, and humanity.